Alright everyone, we are still in Chapter 4 talking about Linux file system management, and what we're going to be talking about today is how to link files. And I think I've sort of had the best sort of success trying to explain this when I relate this to something in Windows that we've all seen before, and that's the concept of shortcuts. So I think probably most of you, when you've used Windows, if you have some sort of thing that you want to be able to get to. Let's say you have a application that you've downloaded and you want to have a link to that on the desktop. Well, you can go find where the actual application lives and create a shortcut and then move that shortcut to the desktop. And then anytime you're trying to do to launch that program, you can actually just go to that shortcut instead of having to go navigate where the actual application is. It's probably in a series of folders that's way down inside something. And if you've ever wanted to do that with a document, you can do that as well. Okay, we are not going to install updates. Just so you guys know, if you're having these things that pop up and say, should we install updates? For what we're doing in this class, the answer is generally no, because we're dealing with a limited amount of hard drive space. The updates aren't really going to get us anything that we don't already have. If you were using this in an actual sort of corporate environment, keeping Linux systems up to date is an important thing to do, and it's good security, but for what we're doing here in a VM, probably doesn't really make too much difference. So that's a little bit of a side there, but so what we're going to be talking about is there are two ways in Linux to link files. There are what are referred to as soft links, and then there are hard links. Soft links are also called symbolic links. And the one that's a little bit more similar to a Windows shortcut is a soft link. So let's go ahead and demonstrate what that's going to look like. Now I'm in my home directory here. It doesn't really matter what I've got, and I've got some extra stuff from last time that I'm going to go ahead and get rid of. I just don't need this for what we're going to be doing today. We just don't need any of that stuff. And so here's kind of the original stuff that I had in my home directory. But if you don't have this stuff in your home directory because you don't have an X windowing system or you're running Kali and it looks different, that's fine. What I'm going to do just have sort of a test here is I'm going to go ahead and create a new file with VI, and I'm going to call this new file. And so now that I've launched VI, I'm going to just type a line. This is a test, and we're going to go ahead and write and quit that. And that was probably mystifying to you unless you're pretty familiar with VI. So if you wanted to create a new file, remember that you can go back and do that with your text editor here if you're in X Windows, or if you want to use one of the other things that we talked about when we were talking about text editors. Doesn't really matter as long as we have some sort of file there. If you don't want to use a file, if you don't want to use a text editor to create a file, remember we can do create a new file by using the command touch. So if I do touch new file 2, you can see that we've got our two new files there. Okay, so how do we create a shortcut to them? Well, the command that we're going to want to use is a command called ln, and it's short for link. Okay, there we go. So we've got our little list of commands that we're going to be using. So we can see that we've got ln in there. Now, the way ln works, and that's an L, not a 1 there. And remember, anytime I give you a command like this, you can always go in and just do a man ln and figure out sort of what the man pages or the info pages have to say about the command that we're using. I'm kind of narrating it, but if you want more information about just about any command that we're talking about in here, we can go find it in there. So what we're going to do is if we're creating hard links or soft links, and we'll talk about the difference between both of those, they both sort of are going to have the same command that we use, ln, to use it to create those links, but it's going to have different options. So if I want to do something like create a symbolic link, or in this sort of to go back to our analogy in Windows, if we want to create a shortcut to something, what I can do is ln, and then I do a -s, and then I'm going to give it the name of the file that exists. So this is new file, and then I'm going to give it the name of the file that I want that I want to point to that. And so what we've got here is you can see that I have it looks like nothing has happened, but if I do an ls, what you're going to see is I've got a new file in here called new link, and you can see that it's in a slightly different color as everything else. And if I did an ls-l, what you're going to see is that this is there's a couple things to notice here. But first of all, it actually shows us here that new link, and then it has a little arrow pointing to new file. So we created a shortcut to this thing right there, sort of so now if I was going to try to access new link, and if I went ahead and say if I did vi on new link here, this is going to point me to the same stuff that I had in new file. That's the actual thing that I'm editing, and I can prove this to myself by saying something like this is an addition to this file. And remember, when I did this command, I actually went and looked at new link, and now if I want to cat out new file, you're going to see that I've actually made that change to this file. So this link right here is going to act like a shortcut to new file. Now, let me give you guys that right now. This doesn't seem like it's really something that's terribly useful because both of these things are in the same directory, right? Let me give you guys just an example. Let me go to temp here. No, that's not temp. Here's temp, and let me say I'm going to just touch something that I'm calling Garrett file for no particular reason. And I'm going to go back to my home directory. Remember, if I just hit CD and I don't put any arguments in, it takes me back to my home directory. And I can do something like, let's go back to look at this command. By the way, here, let me just get this out of the way. The order here matters. The first thing is going to be the file that exists, and the second thing is going to be the link that we're creating. I think most of us probably, if we're thinking about I want this to point to this, we think of this as being a little bit backwards. If you do something like this and you get the files backwards, it's just going to give you an error message. There are a couple commands in Linux where I don't use them frequently enough that I remember the order of everything, and link is one of these ones that I always mess up. I always type it in wrong the first time. If I'm ever trying to defuse a bomb, and the key to defusing the bomb is you've got to type an ln command correctly on the first try, I'm probably going to wind up inadvertently killing us all, right? That's not, I generally mess it up and then have to go back, oh yeah, it was the other way. So if you do this, don't worry about it, it's no big deal. So what I'm going to do is, remembering that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say ln, and then I'm going to say temp Garrett file, and then I'm going to say Garrett link. Now, these are just kind of nonsensical names, but what I want you guys to see is if I have an ls right here, you can see that this file here is going to point to something that's in a completely different place on the file system. So it's not really particularly useful if I have something that just points to something in the same directory. If I want to use this as a shortcut because it's a file with some big long name that I may not actually remember, a soft link works for that too. All right, so so far this seems like it's been pretty clear, and it's about to become somewhat less clear, so let's everybody buckle in and pay attention here. When we create a symbolic or a soft link, people kind of use those words interchangeably because the option for ln is -s, so it doesn't really matter if you say soft or symbolic, that kind of stands for them both. So we're actually creating a separate file. If you were to go sort of zoom in and look at the file system, what you would be able to see is that this thing that says Garrett link is actually its own file, and what it has there is information that points to the file that it's a link to. So there's something here to understand kind of about the Linux inodes, and the textbook has a pretty good explanation of this if you want to go a little bit more in depth. I don't really have the time to do that in the video, but just to get a kind of a view from 20,000 feet. When you're looking at a Linux file system. Linux file system has a thing in it called an inode, and an inode is something that gets assigned to every file in the system, and it actually talks about physically where it is on the hard drive. So I think that we can uh, get a list of the inodes by doing ls-I, and I'm not completely sure about this. We'll see if this works. Yeah, there we go. So let me actually do this, an ls-li, so I get a long listing with inode informations. And what you'll see here is this is an actual location on the hard drive. This is the inode number that represents the inode that actually is physically located somewhere. And what I want you guys to see here is that new file right here has an inode number of 16782, and this link to new file, the new link actually has a separate inode number. So what I've done with this symbolic link is I've actually gone ahead and created another file, and that file is its own separate file. It points to something on the hard drive but the data that file contains is just a link to this other file. All right. Now that seems like it's not terribly important at all. And the reason it matters is because Linux has another option of the way we can create links, and these are called hard links. Now, these are not symbolic links at all. What this is this is a file that points to that same inode on the system. So let me give you guys an example here. Let me just go ahead and get rid of temp Garrett file and Garrett link, and we don't really need new link anymore. And file 2. I'm going to get rid of new file 2. So all we have is a new file, and here it is. So if I wanted to make a link that's referred to as a hard link to new file, the format of the command is going to be the same, except I'm not going to use an S. So I'm going to say ln and then new file. Let's call it new file 1 and new file. And then I've got it backwards. So what I'm doing is, remember, the name of the file that exists is going to be first, and the name of the link that we're creating to this is going to be second. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and do an ls, and let me do an ls-l here. You can see that, well, this looks a little bit different. Doesn't look like either one of these are a list here. In fact, if I do an ls-li, what you're going to see is that these things have the exact same inode number. In other words, these are pretty much the same file. This is the file system. They're both pointing to the same place on the hard drive. At this point, the computer doesn't really know which one is the first one. It doesn't really care which one is the link, because they're pretty much the same thing. If I want to go in here and I want to go rm new file, all I have left is new file 1, right? Well, if we actually go and look at that, what you're going to see here is this is the same file. We haven't actually erased the file, because what we did is we created another pointer to that file, and then we erased the first pointer. So there's still a record of it in the file system. So this isn't so much a link to a file. A hard link isn't so much a link as much as it's just another place in the operating system that points to the same place on the hard drive. So hard links are a little bit weird. So what I want to show you is, first of all, if you have a hard link and you delete the original link to it, but you still have another link, that's fine. You haven't lost any information here. Now, it doesn't work that way with symbolic links. So let me do something like this. I'm going to go ahead and create a symbolic link so I'm going to create a symbolic link that should point from file. Let me actually make that new file 2 to new file 1. Okay, and if I can type my commands correctly, this should look familiar. Now, if I go ahead and delete new file 1 here, if this was a hard link, then that wouldn't be a problem, right? But because this is a separate file that's a shortcut, if I do that, you can see that here I've got a problem. In fact, I've got a really big problem. The file system is giving me sort of blinky messages to let me know that I have a problem, because right now I have a soft link or a symbolic link, new file 2, that's pointing to a file that doesn't exist. Okay. Now, for better or for worse, if I go ahead and recreate that file, as long as I recreate that file in the same name with the same place, it's going to go ahead and point to that file again, which is a little bit weird, but that's how it works. Okay. Um, so be aware of the differences between these. So a couple other things, because hard links are actually referencing a spot on the hard drive, they have to be within the same file. So they have to be within the same partition. So what we've done in some of the ways that we set up Linux, we would set up, say, /home in its own partition. If I have that sort of situation and I try to do a hard link from something that's in home to something that's in another partition, it's not going to work, because the way that hard links work is they're going to share the spot that they're pointing to the same spot on the hard drive. If they're on two different hard drives and there's no way to point to the same spot, then they're not going to work. But symbolic links will still work. The other thing is that if you have a symbolic link and you erase the original file, things are not going to work well. If you have a hard link that you create and then you erase the original file isn't erased as long as there's still a link to that somewhere in the file system. All right. So this is something that doesn't take up much room in the book, but I've spent nearly 15 or 16 minutes talking about it just because the concept is so weird. If you don't like the way that I've explained this, there's some other great videos on YouTube that explain this same thing and they're by somebody who's not me, which may be helpful. And there's a link to some of those under the Blackboard resources. But I hope that this is something that is helpful and that you guys understand. I would recommend going and reading pages 160 through 164. The textbook discussion about this is actually pretty good.